I think there's a couple things, and I don't want Google to cancel any of my accounts or anything, but I think there's a couple things where they kind of failed.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Brian Rios from Wahl+Case, and I'm here today with Joshua Grant.
Hello.
Joshua, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Yeon Sung.
Hi.
Yeon, can you give a little bit of an introduction to our audience?
Sure. My name is Yeon. I came to Japan from Korea about 22 years ago. My career in edtech started within SSP space.
Okay.
And after that, I experienced a little bit of agency side and DSP side. Now I'm heading up the partnership and the connectivity side of business in LiveRamp Japan.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So I guess we'll just kind of hop right into the conversation. I think, the sort of idea around this particular podcast had to do with the news that we saw a few weeks ago where after many iterations and changes and back and forth, Google finally announced, I think, what everybody already knew, which is that they're not going to deprecate third-party cookies, which I think was a really interesting. I think there were several reactions, right? From I think people who work within ad tech, we were like, yeah, I told you so. I think for advertisers, though, it was kind of a little bit of a slap in the face, I think, because they had all been investing in ways and alternatives to deal with this, one of which being data clean rooms. So I thought we could start a little bit with that, just first, in case people who are watching don't know exactly what that is. What exactly is a data clean room? And then I guess the follow-up to that is how has sort of LiveRamp been having conversations about data clean rooms with clients?
Thank you. I think data clean room is a magic box. No, it's not a magic box. So LiveRamp, as a LiveRamp, we talk about data collaboration, meaning two different stakeholders or parties send their data, important sensitive data into one common place to collaborate, to find more insight, to find more segment to activate. And that's a secure, privacy-proven environment is a data clean room per what we talk about in LiveRamp.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, since that announcement and since that information has come out, has the conversations that you've been having at LiveRamp with your clients, has that changed? And how has that conversation changed?
So I think, first of all, data clean room is not a completely new concept. It has been here for a few years, as far as I know. But definitely, recently, there was a lot more attention and interest in the solution itself. So as a LiveRamp, we offered, we call it data clean room technologies per se, for the entire sort of business period, the period that LiveRamp has business. But this year in January, we bought a company called Habu, which is sort of categorized as an independent data clean room. So now LiveRamp is seen as one of the sort of experts when it comes to data clean room technology, and have some sort of network that you can utilize data clean room to activate your insight to the downstreams as well. So definitely we are hearing more and more inquiries. We are getting more inquiries from both the supply and demand side.
Yeah, so it hasn't changed. You haven't had any clients go, oh, okay, well, if Google is not, because I think that's kind of the concern in the industry a little bit, is that, for a long time we had been talking about and trying to get so many clients in terms of first-party data, architectures and infrastructures and all of those sorts of things, because we're like, oh, this thing is coming, and then basically, Google's like, never mind, and then it's does that change the conversations where clients are like, well, actually, then we can slow down a little bit, we can limit investment, for example, because we have a bit more time. Is that started to happen, or you still think that people are still quite eager that what Google did was enough to still sort of scare brands into continuing to invest in data clean room technology?
I think it's definitely latter. The news itself was not exactly thrilling, but in a greater scheme of things, I think nothing changes. And a lot of people see the same way with me. Nothing changes for all the stakeholders in this industry. So no one knows what's going to happen, how Google will unfold what they're going to do with the cookie or the privacy related features per se on their browsers. So with that, the brands especially, now they can continue to work with their, I think, established methods, the cookie-based method, continuously for their targeting and measurement, but it doesn't change the fact. Actually, I think ironically, the Google's recent decision has made it more clear that the industry as a whole, we need to invest more in. We need to look into more newer side of exploring more in a newer side of technologies. Data clearing is one thing. Identity solution is one thing. Yeah. So I think no changes from what I felt. Yeah. The changes I felt by working in LiveRamp, we hear more about the agencies or more stakeholders talking about having interest in what data clearing means, how they can work out in Japanese customers in specific.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting that you say that, because I would imagine if I was an advertiser, what this would show me is how little control I have over my own sort of data architecture. Because as capricious as Google was in this decision, I think that's what would be the first thing. I'd be like, well, wait a minute, this just proves that they changed their mind, but then they could change their mind again in a year, yes. And then this sends me right back to where I started. So I think it could be also, if you were quite clever about it as a brand, you would be like, this is a signal that like I need to have more say and control in like how I sort of build out my data infrastructure, which could make a lot of sense for companies like LiveRamp or any kind of data clean room architectures.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what's kind of interesting about it is like, it's like so Google focused, but like Apple was like another very big player in this. Yeah. And so like, even though like Google is like technically saying like, we're not going to get rid of third-party cookies, they are offering this like opt-in. Yeah. And like, they're basically almost taking the same route as Safari. Yeah. And so you kind of have to protect yourself from both sides anyway. And that's kind of where like, and there's so much more like focus on privacy now. And so you need to have these solutions like a data cleaner or something like this in order to protect yourself.
I mean, you make a good point about the privacy thing, because I think this is really the crux of it, right? Is that I think as people become more sophisticated in their understanding of data usage, and I think regulations are going to continue, not only in Japan, but I think just sort of generally as people start to sort of catch up and really understand that. And so I think, again, even Google notwithstanding, I think you have to sort of think about what is the, from a brand perspective, like what is the way that you're going to manage how you control your data, and also how you adhere to all of the regulations that are going to come down. Another question I wanted to ask was, so we talked about sort of the brand side, but from the publisher side, because you started your career with SSPs, like how has that evolved in Japan in terms of, because one of the big discussions right now from the publisher side is like publishers kind of trying to really get into the data game, right? Because they had always had like this sort of buying that would happen, and now because the walled gardens are concentrating so much of the media spend, publishers like, wait, we have data on people too. So like, how has that evolved in the time that you've been sort of here?
I think, so I've been in LiveRamp for about a year and a half now. And when I decided to join LiveRamp, the solution, the identity solution that we are offering to publishers, so local media partners, was brilliant. It is a game-changing, things for the publishers. Yeah. Well, of course, there is a fundamental issues that for example, our identity solution needs the email address of users to create the pseudonymous ID. And in Japan, we have a sort of lack of email addresses of users, but it's going to change, and I'm very positive about it. So publishers, you're right, publishers were very reliant on the technology vendors to a certain extent. Of course, there are publishers who have more sort of data set or the direct deals sort of side of sales as well. So with all these movements, I feel like there are I am seeing the two extremes. So one side is they were going to invest more in building up their first-party data. It's going to be a sort of a long-term strategy, but they have to start, and I think now is the best timing. Not too late, at the best timing for them to start. And the other extreme is, it is just too difficult for them to, let's say, compete against the other side of the publishers. The data, the amount of data they have to have, the infrastructure they have to prepare for is significant investment. So for those publishers, I think they will rely on more sort of, if I may, I think a technology side of the revenue streams, which is probably contextual targeting providers is one thing. Yeah. And the other thing, many other sort of creative optimization technology is another thing. So I think it's two extremes. And who's going to be the winner at the end of the day? And I think from your point of view, brands will probably prefer the one they can, well, either side will not go away completely. Yeah. But I think from the investment perspective of brand side, I would say, the publishers really need to think about building, leveraging their first party data going forward.
And it's one of those things too, because like a lot of the conversations that we have in terms of sort of media investment talk a little bit about how, I mean, you see with the Trade Desk doing this in a great deal, which is like becoming champions of like the open web, right? And sort of saying like, look, I know one of the things that you should be aware of is that by putting your investment into the walled gardens, you're giving them an extreme amount of control of how you advertise, right? That on top of the fact that I think there are statistics and studies that show that most people spend like the majority of their time outside of social media, looking at websites and things like that. So there's this real disconnect between like how consumers are actually using the internet versus how we're advertising on the internet. But I think the argument that the walled gardens have, which I think is a good one, is like, yeah, but we know everything, right? Like we know everything. We know, what they like, what they buy, what they didn't buy, who they follow, et cetera, et cetera. Where I think the publishers, they're kind of limited to a very specific, if you're Nikkei, for example, you just know a fraction of that. And so to your point, I think it's going to be really interesting how, publishers can come together and sort of start to, I think, collectively say, and I think this is, again, a lot of what the Trade Desk, I think, is trying to do, which I'm sure you guys work with, is like, how do you make a position of the open web that is competitive to the walled gardens? And I think for a lot of brands, it is the data, right? It's the media efficiency, the ROI that comes through from being able to say, I'm sure that I'm advertising to the right person. And at the moment, really, only the walled gardens can kind of assure that, right? Yeah. But the other question I wanted to ask is in terms of, so that the other publishers who are doing sort of contextual targeting and things like that, do you, when you talk about the two different amount of publishers, would you say that the majority of publishers are in the first camp in Japan, or are they in the second camp in Japan?
That's a very tough question. Politically speaking, I think half and half. But, eventually, let's say, in the future, I think there will be more publishers on the side, utilizing first-party data. Yeah. I think right now, again, I think in Japan, it is not only Japan problem, by the way, but it's the free media. As a consumer, consuming the media for free is just given for such a long time. Yeah. So collecting their first-party data, like in whatever format, it becomes a hurdle to losing, page views, all that stuff. So it is very hard.
I mean, I'm like that. If I go, I'm sorry to say, but like if I go to a website and they're like log in, and I'm like, no, I don't really care about the article. It's not that important. Then it'll be on social at some point. No, it is true. I mean, I must admit, I'm guilty of that. Where I'm just like, I just can't be bothered.
It is difficult, but there should be a way. When I was in SSP, there's a PMP, and one of the sort of SSP vendors started doing this consortium. Yeah. Like I think the same concept can be applied if one person, the coverage that I can offer is too small, then I can make an alliance with somebody else and go together. Publisher trading desk has exactly the same concept. So first-party data utilization, leveraging first-party data should have, publishers should be able to do the same sort of alliance, consortium-ish initiatives when they think about first-party data as well. But when it becomes first-party data, it becomes the sensitivity about the word itself. It becomes like it explodes basically. So that's where I think another layer of difficulty comes in when we talk about first-party data or the data clean room. Just the moment we have been doing a lot of marketing activities by sending our first-party data, frankly speaking, to walled garden. But when it comes to open web, when it comes to sort of individual collaboration, just the hurdle becomes like from here to the ceiling. So I think that's another thing, like industry, specifically Japan, collectively need to think about how we can solve this problem, for Japan.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be different how it was resolved in the States per se.
Yeah.
So.
And that has to do with like legal restrictions and structures and stuff. Do you see a particular industry that's more responsive to data clean rooms? Because I remember when I was working on the data side of things, we would have these. I remember I built this one slide. I'll never forget because it took me ages to create. But it was a slide about, like, it was when sort of Google had announced this, and I think it was also with iOS 16 was the one where they changed everything, and it was like, what type of companies or brands would be most affected and which ones would be least affected. And it was like, if you think about companies that have sort of one-to-one, like a Netflix or Uber or whatever, where they, you put in that information and they have all of the data because that's the exchange that you made from the beginning, versus if you take like a FMCG, like a Unilever or something, where they don't sell their own products in their stores, they sell it in other people's stores, and then it's like, where are you going to get the information from? Like, who's going to say, oh, I bought some laundry detergent, I'm going to give you my... So like, do you see, so I used to say all the time, I used to say all the time that like, FMCG would be the most affected by this because you're the ones that have the most distance between you and your consumers, right? Whereas, a lot of the new sort of disruptive ad tech companies, they have a really close relationship. I mean, even the walled gardens, like you have a really close relationship with Instagram, right? So do you see, like, in terms of the clients that you have, whether it's brands and stuff, like, is there a particular industry that's more responsive to it, or?
I think, so when it comes to LiveRamp, I think it probably is similar with other, similar technology providers as well. But I think when it comes to LiveRamp, we have been very successful with retailers, meaning you're correct on the dot. Basically, FMCG clients do not have their data or the points they can gather data. Not many points they can gather data directly, on their own, I guess, if I may. So, but if you think about it, data clean room type of technology exactly provides you the opportunity to enrich your data by collaborating with others, so they can be one of the big beneficiary of this type of technology. And to extend from there, I think that the sectors where has a very high privacy and compliance regulations, such as the financial industry, is definitely one. They could not even think about what the data outside, no way. But now I think with this type of technology, they can make sure that they meet their data security standards or the regulatory compliance, and they can find a new opportunity from outside of their core business pillars, banking or insurance as well. And obvious one is us, advertising and marketing.
No, but I mean, I think it's so true in terms of like, I remember like being able to, like, with one of the clients I used to work on ages ago, they were super interested in like purchase data, and they were like, nothing tells more about someone than like their credit card purchases, right? Like basically it was like, if I can understand when you buy and how often you buy and what you buy, and obviously there are regulations around that, but I do think, if you take a financial company, like if you take an Amex, for example, there must be a world in which they're like, we could make so much money just by telling people like what people have booked and where they're going on vacation and like where they spend their money. Obviously, regulation, good regulation, prevents that from happening. But it is, I think you do see a lot of companies now, both on the publisher side and like on the brand side, sort of thinking about, oh yeah, we do have all of this information about people and what they do. How can we sort of leverage this in a way that feels safe for everyone involved, the consumer as well as like the individual brands. But yeah, it's super interesting because I think like, you know, I think what Google did in terms of announcing this is it kind of made everybody ask more questions. I thought the response would be like, okay, great, we don't need to do anything. And I think what it did is actually made people more interested in like what they should do. So yeah.
I 100% agree with that point, yes.
Yeah. So then I wanted to ask, because obviously LiveRamp is a global company. In terms of what you see between, I imagine you have conversations internally at a global level about data clean room technology, data clean room architectures and infrastructures. And do you see, because I don't want to assume that Japan is behind. But when you look at, let's say, the larger APAC landscape, do you see a fundamental difference in the adoption in, let's say, Asia Pacific versus EMEA or North America?
Sure. I think you use the term different. I think that's exactly how I feel. It is the adoption in, when you talk about APEC, if you include Australia, it's a different story. Yeah, Australia is kind of the States. Yes. But the rest of the APEC, Japan representing the APEC with the most, biggest economy, I think the adoption has been a little bit different from what I learned and seen in LiveRamp specifically. So data clean room is specific. There are separate, different type of data clean rooms exist, basically. So if you're talking about the walled garden data clean rooms, it has been here for a while, and there are probably brands out there have been using the technology. Yeah. And if you're talking about it as another category, I think it's very sort of uniqueness of Japan as well. The big agencies have been offering data clean room, sort of service layer kind of solutions to a lot of clients, which is great. It's very, it's Japan-like. It's Japanized, like customized for Japanese clients, which is perfect. And that has been here for a few years as well, and it has been growing. So from that perspective, adoption has been good, I think. Yeah. But if you're talking about, like LiveRamp, the independent data clean room, there are data owners, data consumers, they come together and do the collaboration and create great outcome. Don't think it exists a lot at this point. Yeah. But the hype's here, so there's a lot of talk, interest. So we're about to start seeing, I think, more changes coming.
I think one of the interesting things is you see agencies get involved, like my agency, but I won't say it. But you see agencies get involved in this. And I think
international
big international Japanese headquartered advertising agency. No, but what you do see from an agency perspective, and I think this is why the agencies get involved. I've always felt that Japan is very much an agency-driven market in comparison to, I think, what I would see in the US or when I worked in Europe as well, which is like the clients kind of drive the core conversation, and then the agencies are there to kind of not only respond, but like sort of be more collaborative, where I find a lot of the clients that I've worked with, even ones who are, headquartered outside of Japan, I think in Japan, there's always kind of the agency sort of drive, like you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And I think with data clean rooms, even from, I think all of the big agencies in Japan have one. Part of that comes from that it's kind of the agency that has to get behind it for the domestic clients to then start to adopt it, right? So the agencies have to go, hey, this is something you should be thinking about and doing, and then the clients go, oh, okay, this makes sense because my agency is telling me that I should do this. And I think the other part of it with agencies is I think that agencies have been trying to be helpful from the publisher side, right? Because of those relationships. So saying, like, to your point, like there are a lot of, I think, more domestic long tail publishers who are like, we don't have the resources to like build this infrastructure. And the agencies are like, well, we do. And then you just give us, we just help you do that. So it isn't, as you said, it's not a question of like being behind or ahead. It's more about like just understanding the way that it needs to be done in the market. And I think it's a different kind of just structure that needs to be created, which seems to be working. Yeah.
If you think about it, the cost and the complexity, frankly speaking, to implement of data cleaning technology is a significant investment for a lot of companies. So either, unless either larger enterprise size organization or the big agencies who have greater resources and expertise per se, need to leave the adoption curve. And then the rest of, I think, independent sort of one-to-one, we call it peer-to-peer kind of collaboration will happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, a big part of that agency advantage is just like the trust that they'll know what to do. You know what I mean? Where it's like if there's a third-party vendor that's coming in and there's no other customers, then it's much harder to say, okay, we'll be the first one in Japan. I think the risk tolerance in other places are probably, that domino can fall much faster. But in Japan, I think it can be like, I remember talking to my friend recently who's working with enterprises, mostly banks, and selling in like even a customer experience solution. And they're just like, no. Like, they're like, we can't be the first person to like, the first company to like track this information. Like, there's absolutely no way. Whereas if they're going with an agency and you can say like, oh, we have this examples, this is the data, this is what's good about it. And they're like, okay, we can trust this person. And once that domino does fall, then all the other banks will fall in line. But it could be like a 2-year sales cycle if you're an independent vendor versus maybe an agency, you can get it done much faster.
Or you see the other thing, which is happening a bit less, but there was a lot of conversation originally around like in-housing, right? So brands would like hire people internally to lead these initiatives, data infrastructure initiatives. I mean, obviously working with an external partner, but there was a lot of conversation around like, okay, we'll bring people into the company. Those people will work with our external partners and we'll build this independently of the agency. And I do still think you see a lot of that. I think in Japan, I think again, because of the cost of it, and then, you have sort of these mega agencies in Japan, I think they can kind of alleviate some of that financial burden. And then obviously from the agency's perspective, it's a lot easier to build one because then we can use it for multiple clients, as opposed to each client having to build like their own custom.
The in-housing trend is really interesting to me because I feel like it was so much like 5 years ago, like it was like a big push. And then I think so many companies realized like, you have to hire how many people? Like we were getting all of this from the agency. Like,
I think people underestimate the value that agencies bring, which is, I think, a couple things. One, you have the opportunity to have people working on your business that have worked on other businesses. For example, myself, I'm now working in luxury, but I used to work on FMCG, and it's a completely different world. But there are things that I can take from that and bring to the knowledge here, which is, maybe we need to bring a little bit more science to data to this part of advertising. So I think that's often underestimated, is the amount of people you have. And then I think also the ability, I think, for agencies to be, I think, more risk-taking and a bit more agile. When you're in a company, there's a lot of hierarchical structures that you have to deal with and approvals and different things like that. And I think agencies can be quite quick at doing that. But and then I think, like you said, I think people just realize in in-housing, like, look how many people you get and how many people it takes to do this. Like, oh, you want an in-house? Okay, hire 40 people because that's how many people are working on your business. I also heard that it's a question of sometimes finding the talent too, because a lot of times, like, not necessarily to say that people like working at agencies. I think agencies, it's like, 50-50. I think there are people who really enjoy working at agencies, and I think there are people who hate it and are like waiting for the moment to get out. But I think with a talent perspective, I think that a lot of people are like, they like that, being able to work on different projects. And I think where you see a lot of the talented people go is they don't really go to the client side, they go to the tech side of things, right? Because then they're like, oh, I want to do bigger things, and there are bigger projects that I want to work on, and there are things that I want to develop. Like the thing that you said, you went from SSP to LiveRamp because you're like, oh, no, I think this is a really great solution, and I want to be a part of creating that. So yeah, I mean, I'm not for in-housing, but I'm not objective.
Yeah. One of the other things you had mentioned was just like the perspective of kind of being a red team versus like their internal.
Oh yeah, the red team, blue team stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's. I was literally having this conversation yesterday, but I was saying like because I'm working on a couple things, and sometimes I think there is always this moment when you talk to any brand where people have worked at the brand for a long time. You believe your brand is great because all you do is hear about how great it is, right? You hear about how great we are as a company. You sit in meetings and hear about the numbers. You talk about and say the name of the brand every single day, right? And so there's a bit of that where you start to, and I think it's fair, you have to, you buy into everything that's being told about the brand. And then I think all of a sudden, someone comes to you and goes, yeah, but not everybody else is believing that. And you can kind of be the red team. And I think in the position that I have, this is completely unrelated to data clean rooms, but I think the unique position that I think a lot of times, but you're in this position as well as yourself, which is we are not Japanese, but we have been in a market for some time. I think one of the things, and I always find one of our ultimate responsibilities is to be this liaison between Japan and headquarters or the West, and sort of be that translation and say, yes, I understand that this is the core thing that you want to do and this is what you believe and but let me give you a little bit back on how this is perceived here, right? So that you can understand that there may be a gap or a disconnect in how you're thinking about it versus how Japan is thinking about it. And to take it back to data clean rooms, it's the same, what you were talking about, where it isn't as simple as like, are Japanese brands adopting data clean rooms? It's like, no, they understand, but there's a whole ecosystem that's slightly different. So we have to present it from this perspective as opposed to, I think, other ways. So yeah, I think it's one of the cool aspects of working in a market that's not your home market, is you get to kind of be this liaison and like, cultural intermediary between, I think, different companies and stuff. Yeah. That was a long tangent. I'm sorry about that. It was a really long. You can tell I'm frustrated about this. You can tell that I have this conversation every day.
Working as a liaison, like I think you're right. You've been here for how long?
I don't want to say because my Japanese is not as good as it should be, but it's been six and a half years, I think. Yeah.
So I think I don't know about you, but within my community, people say if you pass the 4-year mark, you are okay with Japanese culture. Basically, you kind of pass the line that you cannot be a part of it. Yeah. So now we pass that line, then we have the enough aspect of, I guess, understanding or trying to understand the difference between Japan and the rest of the world. And we have the strength from where we're coming from, and American, so I have tasted a little bit of American culture as well. So with that, I think we can bring the value, the biggest value we can bring in. Yeah. I think, to bridging the gap.
Yeah, and I think when you think about like innovation or disruption or any of these shifts that are happening, even with like Google and data and things like that, is that I think this ability, and I say this to my team all the time, is like you always have to. There's always a logic behind a decision that is being made. You might disagree with the logic, but it's your job to understand the logic, right? So even if you look at that from like a brand choice perspective or a brand preference. There's a reason that someone chooses this brand over another one. And you might disagree with why they're doing that, but it's your job as a marketer to investigate why people are making those decisions. And I think when it comes to innovation, what I always try to do is, sort of think about it from like, where is the starting point, and then how do you adapt your message to sort of be connected to the existing market, as opposed to, I think, this kind of top-down thing that sometimes we sort of see even with like Google and Apple, where they're like, yeah, this is the way we're going to do things. And you're like, yeah, but then we need to like kind of filter that a little bit so that it makes more sense to a market like this one. Yeah.
So one thing I want to say, just going back to the Google thing, this is not directly related to data clean rooms, but it's just something that it's had on my mind since it was announced. They really won. Like, they totally played both sides of this problem, and they were like, they got the publicity push for privacy, and then they also totally were they pushed their own solution. So now people are going to start using the privacy sandbox. Now they're like, okay, it's fine for data, for third-party data, third-party cookies, and they look publicly like they're all about privacy, because they're like, oh, you can opt in or opt out of advertising now.
Do they, or do they look? I don't know if I agree.
I mean, Gen Pop, not industry.
Yeah, but I think there's a couple things, and I don't want Google to cancel any of my accounts or anything, but I think there's a couple things where they kind of failed. In my opinion, not failed. I don't want to say they failed. Google doesn't fail.
They're doing so good.
But I think first off, Apple did it first. Yeah. So already you look like the second player in the space, because a company that I think people sort of have a very positive sentiment towards did it first, and very almost aggressively, right? Yeah. They ran ads and don't follow me, and so I think with iOS that was kind of the first thing. I think the other thing that's quite interesting, and this may be more to your point, more insider, is the privacy sandbox had bad reviews. It was just constantly, people were like, this doesn't work, it doesn't make sense, how are we supposed to, and to Google's credit, they were like, well, this is the point, this is why we did it, we were going to give feedback, and then they did it. And I think they just got to a point where maybe, and I don't know, I'm not inside Google, but there must have been a conversation around
but they're not getting rid of it. That's the thing. It's
they're not getting rid of it, but I think, I don't know if I believe that was their ultimate goal was to try to basically do both of them. I think they really, it's a lot of investment, right? I think they really thought this would be the solution, and it was just much more difficult. I think brands pushed back. I think there were, it was just such a huge change. To be fair to Google, it's a much bigger change, I think, than, what Apple did with iOS, because it was a very simple, do you want this app to track you, yes or no? And we're just going to make it an automatic no unless you say yes. That's a lot easier. But I don't know if they came across as it was the point I was making earlier. I think now they just look a bit more capricious than they did before. And so it would make me a little bit okay, but as an advertiser, you're right. The average consumer, but my theory is I don't think the average consumer cares about anything.
What is data?
We can't say that.
It's the thing we talked about when we did a data podcast last year or whatever, where it's I don't know. I guess there's two things. It's I think people are just annoyed by advertising. I don't think that people are necessarily that frustrated by the data situation. I think it's because the advertising situation is so terrible, and then people go, well, the reason the advertising situation is so terrible is because all of these companies have all of this data on you, and then they advertise specifically to you. And so I think in many people's minds, the data situation is connected to something else they hate, which is advertising, right? I think that what we have not been very good at as an industry is sort of explaining, and I've said this before, explaining what is the trade-off for giving the data. And I still don't think that's been done very well. And so I think this is why people are pushing for privacy, because they just hate being advertised to, because the experience is so awful. And I think until the experience gets better, I think people will always be like, no, don't track me, right?
Yeah, I heard this kind of new marketing mentality. It's like a buzzword, but modes. like what mode you're in. So like if you're in a shopping mode, if you're in like a parent mode, if you're in like work mode, like that's where the contextual advertising will really focus. And I like that. I think that generally has like a good appeal to like Gen Pop, because like it feels a little bit less invasive if you're like thinking about, okay, like I'm reading this article and like what are the best questions to ask my kid when they're coming home from school, and then there's like an advertisement maybe for like I don't know, some kind of parenting product or like a book or something, and like then I'm more like, oh, okay, like this feels less invasive. It feels more like there's a clear through line between what's being advertised and what I'm doing, versus like if I'm reading that same article and then it's advertising like, I don't know, like a new pair of toe socks because I like love toe socks. You know what I mean? And then it's just like, what? How did they know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I guess it's like, I think the mode thing is quite interesting. I mean, we talk about that in like a slightly different way, but I do think that's super interesting. But it also has to do with like, do you want to see something, and this is tricky, like at what times are you interested in like what I call discoverability versus when you just want to see something that you've already been in market for. And I think that's also the balance too with a lot of the publishers. Is like, do you show me something that haven't even considered, or do you show me something that you know through data I've been considering, and does that make more sense? And I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answer to that, but it's like, you know, if I'm reading an article in the New York Times in the morning, having my coffee, do you show me an ad about a trip to Tahiti, or do you show me like a new MacBook? Because I'm in like that space of like, so yeah, I think it's interesting.
You've been on the Apple website and they're still tracking you even though they say they're not.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, I shouldn't say this, but I've opted out of all advertising. Just because I'm too critical. It's not because I don't believe in it. I'm just too critical. And then I'll like click on the ad, and then I'll go down a rabbit hole because I want to see who like made the ad, and so I've just kind of opted out. But
You know, I shouldn't say this either. I love Instagram. Like I have children too. I shouldn't love these platforms from parent perspective, but I love Instagram because the relevancy.
Instagram advertising is.
This is like something that's come up
my
so
God.
many times. I've like bought things, and I'm just like there's like a magnetic goo, and I was like on the order page, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, this is...
But I think it's. I mean, again, it goes back to the thing we said about walled gardens, right? I mean, some of them do it really well. I think Instagram is an example of that. I would argue that the YouTube experience is like the complete opposite. But Instagram, they're very, very good at that, and it feels so seamless, and there's a level of discoverability, and it has, you know, I mean, kudos to them, because I think that's the experience, and I think that goes back to like the advertising experience, and what I think publishers need to do is, and there are some doing that, like Condé Nast is doing that a lot, like New York Times is doing that a lot, where they're trying to make the advertising experience feel premium and connected, and I'm sure that's a lot of what you guys are doing with those types of publishers. So
yeah. So I have one question that I want to ask before we kind of wrap, or before we go into maybe more specifics about LiveRamp. This is kind of for both of you. What are some of maybe like legally things that you've run into in Japan, like specifically for using any kind of data clean room, or have there been any things that have been affecting you, either of you, like from the kind of publisher side or the advertiser side?
I can go first, but then I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to say something that I don't know is entirely true, and if I'm going to fact check this after we film, and if it's not true, then we're going to cut it out. But there are two things that I remember that you could do in the US that you can't do here. So one of them is, I believe there are companies that offer credit card data that you can buy, like as a third party. I won't say the name of the company, but I remember there are a few companies where you can get like bank card information data in terms of purchases and programs. No, it's fine, because I don't want to be, the whole objective of this podcast is to never be sued, right? No, but I remember specifically you could do that, and I think that they've canceled this now because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but you also could target by political affiliation, which are two things that are big no-no in Japan. First off, I think you can do purchase data through, if I remember correctly, like you can get purchase data from like PayPay and places like that. But like there's no, like SMBC and like Mizuho are not gonna give you anything, which I think in the US that is possible through some means. And then the other thing is like targeting people based on sort of political affiliations and things like that. I'm almost pretty sure in Japan you can't do that either. So those are the two that I have run into, because obviously from a brand perspective, purchase data would be obviously incredible if you knew who was like, you know, how much money they were spending on travel versus food versus whatever. That'd be great from a brand perspective, but I understand from a consumer perspective how that would be also quite scary. But I don't know for you if there's other ones that
I think I have a little bit of different perspective, but not perspective, different maybe knowledge, I guess, about it. The entire my knowledge set is built up within LiveRamp experience. So take it with a grain of salt. And at the end of the day, whatever legal requirement you need to meet is your choice. That's what we say. As far as I know, the privacy law is very strict, but it's not as strict as GDPR per se in Japan yet. It is kind of gray area a lot of times. So there's no, you know, one of my clients told me you have to go make a, you know, case, the court case. So it is not gray anymore. Yeah. It's the 1 or 0. Like if I'm successful, our solution will sell. If I'm not successful, we'll close basically. Yeah. Because the law will prevent us from doing the business. And the most common one when we talk about our identity solution or data clearing solution is that when it comes to so my solution specific, we need an email address as a sort of the common key, but we pseudonymize it so it is not traceable back to.
So just to stop you for a second, so email address is PII data,
PII,
right?
exactly.
Hashed email is not.
It is not, but because email address is PII, so a lot of companies make a choice generally speaking, it is considered to be a PII. Okay. So when you do PII data
Should we say
transfer,
what PII is? It's personally identifiable.
So what is, it's like email, phone, is it phone number?
Yes.
An address?
I think so.
Yeah.
We'll I can be wrong too. Yeah. I can be wrong too. But when you do transfer those type of data outside of organization, especially, you need to get consent from the users that exactly what you're doing. Yeah. And not a lot of companies are ready, like as of today, to meet their requirements.
Yeah, because you have the whole sort of, what is it, like data governance policies, right? And then I think depending on the industry, like you mentioned finance and stuff, like depending on the industry, depending on what you want to do with the data, there's a whole bunch of like data governance laws that are, you have like the top line laws, which are like the GDPRs and the API, I think is the one in Japan, that kind of tell you at a top line what you can and can't do. But then, like you said, there's then these specific things that like each of the brands or each of the publishers want to do, and then they have to sort of go in and like dig into that and sort of determine what are the like data governance policies around that. Like if I give you my data for this reason, you can't then do something else with it, right? And a lot of the brands, I think, you know, from their perspective, they're like, well, we got the email address, well, just do whatever with it. And you're like, no, but you can't. Like, if I gave you my email address, I'm just making something up, but if I gave you my email address so that you can send me off.
Actually. So we collect email addresses when we talk to candidates, when we talk to people who are job seekers, and we can't then use that to we couldn't just sell that to advertisers.
Yeah. But I think that's some of the top line regulation. Okay, but like for example, like
we also can't use it to like send marketing promotional. We actually have
exactly. Yeah, or like if I give you my data because, you know, I don't know, you're Uber Eats and you need my address, but then you use my address to do something else, I think and I think finance is probably the most strict one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Healthcare.
Healthcare, finance, because all of that stuff not only has built-in privacy laws around it, just as the industry, but then on top of that, it has, Cool. Well, super interesting discussion. Do you have any more questions that we can help you with?
No, I do want to say about YouTube advertising.
It's horrible.
I found
It's horrible.
on this podcast. There's another recruitment company advertising running YouTube ads on this podcast.
Oh.
So if,
Well, that's good on them.
if you
Yeah.
see any ads that are for a recruitment company, that's
That's
not
clever.
us. That's not Wahl+Case.
That's clever.
Yeah.
That's clever, actually, yeah.
I mean, I will admit, rightfully so, I have YouTube Premium because
Me too, yeah.
it's like insufferable. Like it's just.
Dude,
It's
whatever.
just, and then you
yeah.
go to people's houses and they don't have YouTube Premium. You're like, what?
This is the ad load. It's like constant.
Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's
And I
insane.
get it. Like I understand from a monetization perspective. Like I believe that content creators should be able to monetize, and it is people's livelihoods, and I understand. But I mean, you have an 8-minute video with like 3 ads. It's like this is insane. And again, I think it goes back to the advertising experience. Whether you see that on a website where you scroll through and there's like pop-ups like it just, I think it has to kind of tone down a little bit. And so hopefully, yeah, with the data, we'll do more. We'll try to do better advertising, because that was always, I mean, I guess the last thing I'll say is like that was always part of the discussion, was that the new privacy regulations would force advertisers to make better advertising, right? That was kind of the thing that people kind of talked about, was like, you won't be able to just push a button and target, you know, this particular person. You're gonna have to work to get their attention, right? You're gonna have to actually make interesting ads and have a really nice experience. And I think what I'm worried about is now that like the third-party cookies still exist, and we're like, never mind.
Shoes that can be swapped out, like a white background.
Yeah.
Like buy now.
Shoes, buy now. Like T-shirt, buy now.
But you know, I think the speed is, I guess, important. But I think at the end of the day, the direction is more important. So
Yeah.
as an industry, as a whole, I truly believe that we are heading to that direction. It's like, we care about the personal, the privacy, consumers' privacy in general. I didn't hear about it at all when I was in SSP, for example, which is a few years back. But now everybody cares about it. So everybody kind of has a knowledge about it. And even my children, 13, 11, they know that too. So in general, I think society is heading to the right direction. How we're going to execute it, how fast we can execute it, I don't know. Who knows? But I think slowly but surely we're going to direction, I believe.
That's a great way to end it.
Yeah, awesome. So where can people learn more about LiveRamp, and is there anything else you want to add or promote for you guys?
Well, we have a company website, of course, a rather imperfect Japanese one and a very robust English one. So you can visit liveramp.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I can answer any questions about LiveRamp as long as you want.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yeon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That was awesome.
Thank you.